Hello guys, how are you all doing? Welcome back to Rule of Two Review, and man, after a long break for my vacation this past week, it feels really good to be back on camera, talking about video games, and talking about the Nintendo Switch. So, this is a pretty exciting day because I'm going to finally review Yooka-Laylee on the Nintendo Switch. I've been talking about it for a few weeks. I got confirmation I would get the code a couple of months ago, and it's exciting because I haven't gotten any review codes from any developer since starting the channel. I really haven't even tried to make a push to do so until probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 months ago, and Yooka-Laylee was the first one that someone was able to send me. I was really excited. Unfortunately, I didn't get my review code until like 2 or 3 days before the game came out, so it was pretty late getting to me. And because this last week we had a house guest, one of our best friends from back home in Denver was staying with us this week to be able to go and see the brand new Star Wars movie together and all these different things. It was like, man, it's a really awkward time. I'm not going to be able to make videos this week. I'm going to have very little gaming time, although I did manage to squeeze in more than I anticipated. And I was like, oh, I wish that I just got this last week like I first thought, so I could have had the whole review ready to go. That being said, it's only been a few days. The game has been out for literally just a few days. I have managed to get many hours and a few worlds into the game, so while this is not going to be the most complete review, and I'm not speaking from the perspective of somebody who's completed the game, I figured I would treat it more as kind of like an impressions review, so to speak. This definitely isn't like a final score and a final judgment, but I've got a lot of solid hands-on time with this game in portable mode and in TV docked mode, and with enough of a handle over what the game is like and what the presentation truly feels like, I felt like it was time for me to give you my official impressions on Yooka-Laylee on the Nintendo Switch. So what's really interesting about Yooka-Laylee is that it's kind of a controversial title. I'm sure a lot of us know. It was a huge Kickstarter reveal. It was a very successful campaign, a game that looked fantastic. We were all very, very excited for it. And when it released earlier this year, it turned out to be not ready to go for the Nintendo Switch specifically. It was going to be a Wii U game, and then of course they moved it to the Switch because of the Wii U going away and Nintendo moving on onto the Switch. And because of that, the game was not ready for release in April earlier this year, 2017, when it released on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. So myself and a lot of other people have been waiting for the Nintendo Switch version with fingers crossed that the game would actually truly release on the Switch before actually playing it. Now, the controversy, of course, comes from the fact that when it released earlier this year on the PS4 and Xbox One, it ended up not really lighting the world on fire, and I have to tell you, I was massively disappointed and so sad to see because I was beyond pumped for this game, which was this amazing retro callback to the old 64-bit N64 collectathon sort of big open-world experiences like Banjo-Kazooie. They very much are trying to evoke the feeling and look and tone and sound and gameplay of that game and other games like it of that time, and to have it come out and get a lot of like 6s and I mean 5s and 6s and some 7s, it was like, whoa, this game isn't really delivering, which unfortunately I feel like we've seen happen a few times with the Kickstarter crowdfunded sorts of games, and I guess the big complaints were an empty, unexciting world, and mostly poor controls and a really poor camera. So what's even more unique about the Switch version is the fact that with so much time between the release of the version earlier this year and the version on the Nintendo Switch, Playtonic has gone on record stating that this is the definitive version, the most polished version. They fixed a lot of the issues. They feel like they have released the most ultimate version of this game, available only currently in digital form for $40, downloadable on the eShop. They're discussing and considering a physical version, but as I theorized on a video even recently, I feel like they wanted to just get this game out by the end of 2017 so that they can say every version of this game was completed and released in the same calendar year. So, here we are, several months later, mid-December, this game releases on the Switch, and I finally have a chance. This is my first hands-on time. I have no sort of frame of reference to what it really looked like and played like and felt like in the early versions. Now that I've had probably 5 or 6 or so hours of hands-on time on this game, what do I think? My initial gut reaction to this game is that, you know, it's pretty okay. So yeah, I feel like the idea of it being pretty okay or kind of good is probably the feeling that has permeated my experience so far. This game is definitely not fantastic, and obviously we have to address the fact that it is releasing, the Switch version at least, is releasing in a post-Mario Odyssey world. It is a very good point that people like to bring up a lot, and while I do think that that affects some of how I've personally been experiencing the game, it's not like it's vastly changed how I think the game has been delivered to me. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, obviously, no game like this is ever going to compare to Nintendo's top offerings in this genre, such as the recently released Mario Odyssey. But I also pride myself in being someone who can, you know, pretty much separate myself from the situation in the scenario and say, okay, just because this game isn't going to be a Mario Odyssey style or quality, can I still see it for what it is and what it's doing well and the things that maybe isn't doing well, and keep the Mario Odyssey comparison fairly separate in my brain. And I feel comfortable saying that, yes, for the most part, I've been able to do that. And I have to say that this game, like I said, definitely not great, not as good as it probably could have or should have been, but I really can comfortably tell you guys, at least this Nintendo Switch version, it is far from a train wreck, and I'm really happy to be able to report that. I think I have to say that the thing that this game does well, it does surprisingly well. Mostly the size and the scope of the worlds, and what it feels like to traverse and jump on these platforms and move through the world and swim through the water and all these different things. I mean, really, these worlds that you go to are pretty interesting. It's set up where the bad guys are stealing these books and stealing all the pages of a very special book, and of course, Yooka and Laylee, I should say, are trying to find all of the pages to a very special book. And so the main item you're trying to collect in all these huge worlds are pages to this book, which are characters, and of course they're called pages, which is an incredibly obvious name for them, but you know, it works for what it is. Those are the main things you're trying to collect. There are also feathers that you can collect, which are essentially the currency throughout the world, and a couple of other small items like heart container sort of elements that increase your health and whatnot. And hey, you know, it's got that collect-a-thon Banjo-Kazooie feel in that respect, and I totally appreciate it. And to me, it works. It's fun. Once I got over the initial awkwardness of the controls and stuff when I started, I was like, hey, I like trying to collect these feathers and spend them on different things, and I like trying to collect these pages. I think that they're, you know, the right sort of item to motivate me to want to keep moving forward. And they're hidden behind a lot of different puzzles and whatnot in the world, and the puzzles are pretty benign and unexciting for the most part, but they get the job done. And so I've felt at least entertained enough trying to make myself to the next pagey. It feels really funny and weird to say page. I feel kind of silly, but that's what they're called, you know? And so, you know, through that sort of mechanic of traversing through the game, I think the worlds are huge, and I love that kind of stuff in a game, especially a platformer. And honestly, the graphics, I gotta say, they're very pretty. I feel like the whole presentation, from the very solid music to the pretty solid art style and graphics, not amazing, but still very good and serviceable, it actually, to me, feels very similar to the presentation of Mario plus Rabbids. Now, bear with me, guys. I'm not saying the games are similar, and the gameplay could not be any more different. But as far as the look of the world, and the tone, and the sound, and the music, it really feels like some of the coolest moments in Mario plus Rabbids, and I think that that's nothing but a good thing. Also, I have to say, there are a lot of moves in this game. Yooka-Laylee actually have a pretty large repertoire of moves that they can get and attain and continue to get more and more from. You meet the Trouser Snake character, who, as you collect the feathers, you use those to buy different moves. And what's really cool is you can buy the moves in different orders, and because you're purchasing them in different orders, that means different other areas and aspects of the game open up in a different order, because you might have purchased one move that lets you go this way to do these things, but the other move, if you had purchased it first, would have shut that way off, and instead you got to go the other way to do those things. And that is, you know, true both in the hub world as well as the different worlds you go to throughout the game. I really enjoy that, and I have to say the new moves I'm getting feel very contextual and appropriate for what the Yooka-Laylee characters are, and very fun for the world. I mean, they're not extremely exciting. Nothing in this game is extremely exciting, but within the context of what this simple platforming game does, it works. And it's got, heaven forbid I make this comparison, it's got the kind of Metroidvania feel where, like I was just saying, the more moves you acquire and get, whether you're accomplishing things or you're buying them from the Trouser Snake or whatever, you're opening up new paths and different ways to go through the world. Even the worlds you've already been to and revisited. And that really is a lot of fun, and I have been shocked so far at how many different moves I've been able to acquire in just the first couple of hours and the first couple of worlds, and I'm really enjoying having a new move to add to my repertoire every single time something else happens. And then I'm like, oh, that's what these weird blinking things were in this corner in that area. Now that I purchased this move, I see what this move lets me do. Let me go back here, and suddenly I've opened up a whole new area, or I've expanded the world I was already in and added a bunch of new things to do and to explore, and I'm really digging digging that. Now, as fun and impressive as some of those aspects are, we obviously have to get into some of the negatives. And yes, some of these negatives feel very reminiscent of the negatives I was hearing back when the game first launched earlier this year, like I mentioned. So we'll address the big one, which at that time earlier this year was the camera. I'm playing the Nintendo Switch version. They claim to have improved the camera, and I have no frame of reference to what it was like back then. But I can say that the camera is not terrible. It is definitely serviceable enough that I think that you can play through this game if you're very interested and you didn't hate it before and you want to pick it up on the Switch. I would say that the camera works well enough. Yes, it gets stuck in weird places and you can't do all of the things that you want to try to do with it. And it also has a weird kind of transition when you're kind of moving, you know, from your x-axis to your y-axis, left and right to up and down, and you want to move it diagonally. It hits this weird sort of speed bump where it slows down and it becomes awkward to keep it very accurate. And that is a shame, not to mention it will get caught on certain, you know, certain items throughout the world, or get stuck behind things in weird ways. The typical kind of things that a poor camera does. We are all familiar with these things. And yes, that does happen to a degree, but based on what I heard in April when the other versions launched, I expected it to be much more of a nuisance and a problem. And honestly, it really hasn't been that bad. It's not that much of a hindrance, but it does still have those typical problems. And there are times where a funky camera has led to a death or a failure of a puzzle or a very specific difficult platforming section, and suddenly I've fallen off because I couldn't get the camera to do what I wanted. And it's just like, ah, darn it, you dumb, stupid camera. If only you were better. If only you were Mario Odyssey quality, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But sadly, that's not the case. The other big thing are the controls, and the controls fall in kind of the same area as the camera, whereas they are definitely not terrible, they are not game-breaking, and they're not much of a hindrance, but there are issues with it. There is something, this is where I'm going to go to a little bit of a Mario Odyssey comparison. There is something to how Nintendo and companies that make games that as good as what Nintendo does, where they really nail the feeling of you can just, I don't know, organically understand without overthinking it, how far in the air you are, where your character is, where and when they're going to land, what the weight of your character feels like when they jump, when they hit the peak of their jump, when they're coming down, what the range of their jump is, all of these different things that we probably don't even think that we're analyzing when we're playing a good game, but we truly are. It's very interesting how well it works in games like that and how well you can use your shadow to track where you're going to land. And in Yooka-Laylee, it's close, man. It almost reaches that sort of point where it's a very solid and smooth controlling kind of platforming game, but it does fall just a little short. Again, not enough to break the game, not enough to make me feel like this game is garbage and trash, and now that I'm getting this video out, I never have to play it again. I mean, that's not the case. It really does work. You know, the big trick we all use, like I just referenced, is following our shadows. That's what you do in 3D platforming games like this. That lets you know where the platform is, when you want to stop doing your hover jump or your double jump, and when you want to make sure your character is going to fall right specifically where you want them to do it. And you can do that in this game, and it does work, and many times it is fun. But boy, oh boy, many times it's just a disaster as well. It's very kind of hit and miss, you know, and I have to say that the weight of Yooka-Laylee is a little awkward and uneven. It makes it hard to control a lot of your jumps and your traversal through the worlds and your platforming, and that is definitely a shame. Also, when you're trying to, you know, point Yooka-Laylee in a certain direction, like, I don't know, if you want to not have to walk too far, maybe you're on a very small platform and you're facing one way, but you need to turn the other way because you're going to have to shoot some items with your tongue, and you want to do it and you can't fall off because if you do, you're going to die. I got to tell you, turning that character around and the amounts of steps that he takes, or she, I actually think it might be a she, but either way, the amount of steps that Yooka and Laylee will take when you just try to face them in certain directions, they move too much, too awkwardly, and their awkward weight becomes a factor, and it will mess you up. You will fall off the thing you're just trying to stand on, or you will not be able to aim properly because it's hard to aim this way, and the physics and the platforming and the awkward controls will become a barrier in these kinds of moments. Beyond that, I mean, I really feel like the presentation is the only other thing I want to finish discussing, and I kind of did already, talking about how the game sounds very good, the music is fantastic, I really do like the graphics. Yes, they're not blowing the doors off of the graphical world, but are they pleasant, and are they very sort of convicted in how they wanted this game to look, in the art direction that they went in? Yeah, I mean, I think that stuff really is one of the biggest strengths of the game. It's something I didn't expect, but I really feel like they knocked it out of the park. Beyond that, they do the Banjo-Kazooie thing, and they've got a lot of text dialogue and a lot of characters you're talking to that allow you to do all sorts of different things. And I appreciate that, and I don't really hate it, but it comes off as a little bit cumbersome, and sometimes it gets in the way. There's way too much text dialogue, and they do have some really funny dialogue. I will say they kind of went for humor in how a lot of the characters the NPCs will crack jokes to you as you talk to them and they're telling you your next thing. And that's great. I appreciate the humor, but honestly, I never cared, and there's just way too much of it. And it's awkward to scroll through, and I don't know, it just doesn't really work for me overall. And they are doing the weird noise thing where, you know, they don't speak dialogue out loud that you can hear. They make the weird, like, bah, 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 like awkward sort of grunty noises and bird noises and snake noises and beep noises based on whatever sort of character they are, which is something the Banjo-Kazooie games did, and it was really cool in those games. Nowadays, in this game, it is a neat little throwback, but it doesn't quite feel or sound the same. It honestly has the feel of, like, whoever programmed all these sound effects, and I'm sure this is probably how they actually did it, by the way, and as a musician, I feel like it kind of gives me an inside edge into how they would have done this. Let's say they take, like, a weird little grunty dinosaur character you're going to talk to with little grunts to speak, and they have a whole keyboard laid out, and every key on the keyboard is probably a different pitch to the grunt, and it literally feels like they're just, like, poking, you know, up, down, up, down, up, down, poke, 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 on just different random keys. So you get these really awkward, hard cuts between the different pitches of grunts that your character's getting. And it just sounds really cheap in that it was a very quick and easy and not very thought out way to accomplish this kind of speaking for the NPCs. And it's not like the end of the world, another thing that doesn't make or break the game, but it's just kind of awkward, and I really just wish they didn't do that. So yeah, for the most part, that's how I feel about the game so far, and you can tell I'm kind of middle of the road on it. You know, I've been able to do a couple of boss battles. Those are fairly interesting. The puzzles are really sometimes very cool and very clever, the way they'll implement both typical platforming as well as some of the abilities that you're gaining throughout the game. There are a lot of puzzles, more than I was expecting. I do like that, and some of them are fun. Some of them are just a royal pain in the butt, and they are not fun, and they will drive you crazy, and it becomes very frustrating because when you're failing at a lot of them, it's more because the game wasn't really designed right or the controls don't work or whatever the case may be. More so that than you making a mistake. It's not like a Donkey Kong Country kind of thing where when you fail, it's because the game didn't make you fail. It's because you just weren't quite good enough. This game is sort of a balance of sometimes it's you're not good enough, but a lot of times it's the game just not executing itself properly. And that becomes frustrating, and you want to yell and swear at the game, and I've done quite a bit of that this last couple of days when playing the couple of hours I've been able to. So, you know, at this point, I think that that's probably a good summation of how Yooka-Laylee on the Switch has turned out. It is not great. I wouldn't even say it's very good, but it is okay, because it's far from a train wreck, and I don't hate playing it. You know, I'm not going to give it a score right here. In another week or so, if I've been able to beat it or at least play many more hours and worlds into it, I might do something where, like, I do a little bit of a touch-up review and maybe I give it an actual factual score. But what I will do to kind of satiate some of the need for that is say what I feel like it's trending towards. If I was to guess what I feel I might want to score this game at the end if I were to beat it based on what I've done so far, and as I'm seeing the worlds open up more and more and I'm seeing all the cool and good and fun things it's doing, but also getting more and more frustrated by all the bad things it's doing and the very cumbersome and awkward controls and camera, I feel like it's probably leading towards a 7 out of 10 for me. You know, I'm not saying that's my score. I'm not saying you should take it to the bank that, well, Robert Rule of 2 Review gave it a 7, so that's a 7, which means I definitely want to buy it because a 7 is pretty good, or my standards are too high and a 7 isn't good enough for me, whatever you feel about that score. Don't take it that way, but I think that there's enough weight and something that you guys can probably get from me telling you that it feels like it's panning out to be a 7 out of 10 game. And I gotta tell you, for me, more often than not, I feel like a 7 out of 10 game is a pretty good game. And there are a lot of games that get 7s that I end up really liking and have been worth my money. Sometimes a 7 out of 10 ain't so good, and it depends on the genre, the person reviewing it, and how it all works out for you. This is just my opinion on Yooka-Laylee. It's not as good as I think it should have been, not as good as I think they wanted it to be, but I don't hate it, and I'm looking forward to playing it a little bit more. So that's what I think about Yooka-Laylee on the Nintendo Switch. So far, several hours and several worlds into the game. What do you guys have to say about Yooka-Laylee? Did you play it earlier this year? Did you like it or hate it when it came out earlier this year? Have you been excited or waiting for the Switch version? If my review was helpful to you in any way, definitely please let me know. I'm looking forward to doing more reviews. in the future. Very excited for some other review codes I know I'm getting for some pretty big games coming up next year, so it's going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, Yooka-Laylee, interesting game, interesting controversy, weird sort of beast with how this whole thing has played out so far leading to the Switch release. But I'm happy to report that it's not just a god-awful train wreck, like I said. So tell me what you guys think about Yooka-Laylee and the Nintendo Switch below. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in. This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.